Ever felt like squash vines have a mind of their own? Let's tame them together.
It is the middle of June. You walk out to the backyard garden and you can already see it happening. The squash you planted 6 weeks ago has made up its mind about where it wants to go. Across the path, over the cucumber bed, toward the fence, toward the tomatoes, toward anything it can reach. The vines are thick and hairy, and they move like they own the place. You step over one, you step around another. You try to remember where the peppers were supposed to be, and you cannot find them anymore, because the squash has covered the whole corner of the garden in a green tangle. That is knee-high and spreading by the day. You did everything right in May. Good soil, good seed, good spacing, the way the packet told you. 2 hills over here, 2 hills over there, plenty of room between them. The little seedlings looked so manageable coming up out of the ground, and now it is June, and they are not manageable anymore. They are enormous, and they are going sideways in every direction. And the rest of your garden is disappearing underneath them, so you do what most people do. You try to redirect a vine with your foot. You pick up the growing tip and move it the other way. You lay it back toward the open ground, and by the next morning it has turned itself around again and gone right back to where it wanted to go. You cannot argue with a squash vine. You will lose every time. Now, I want you to sit with this for a moment. The squash plant spreading across your garden in every direction is not following some fixed law of nature. It is not doing what squash has to do. It is doing what squash does when nobody guides it. There is a difference. A squash vine will go wherever you let it go. Lay it flat on the ground, and it runs flat across the ground, taking up 8, 10, 12 feet of your best garden space, and shading out everything in its path. But point it upward, give it something to climb, teach it early where you want it to go. And that same vine goes straight up instead of out. It takes up 2 feet of ground instead of 12. The same plant, the same seed, the same water, growing in a fraction of the space and leaving the rest of your garden free for everything else you wanted to grow. Every serious kitchen gardener in this country once knew this, not because they read it somewhere, because their mothers grew it this way, and their mothers before them. Because a small backyard garden or a homestead plot does not have room for a squash vine to do whatever it pleases. You work with the plant, you train it early, you show it where to go, and the plant cooperates. That knowledge was passed down in backyards and kitchen gardens for generations. And somewhere along the way, as the seed catalogs got bigger and the garden centers started selling pre-made cages for tomatoes, and the advice on the internet told you to plant squash in hills and give each hill 4 feet of space, the old training methods stopped being passed down. And now, most American home gardeners are out there in June, trying to outrun a vine. That will outrun them every single time.
Squash vines may outrun you, but they won't if you know the secret.
I'm going to show you how to stop outrunning it. My name is Elias Yoder. I am Amish and I farm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. My wife Esther grew up in a kitchen garden where space was never wasted, not 1 square foot of it. Her mother trained squash vines vertical the same way her mother trained them before her. You get more fruit, you get healthier plants, you get your garden back. And you never again spend a June morning trying to untangle a squash vine from your tomato cages with your bare hands. Here is what I'm going to walk you through. First, why vertical training works the way it does. What is actually happening inside the plant when you point it upward instead of letting it run? Second, how to choose the right support for the kind of squash you are growing. Because not every structure works for every vine, and getting this wrong costs you the whole season. Third, exactly how to train the vine week by week from the moment it is big enough to handle, what to touch, what to leave alone, and how to support the fruit so the vine does not snap under the weight. And fourth, what you can do with the space you get back, because that is the part most folks do not think about until they see it with their own eyes. None of this is complicated. None of it requires tools you do not already own. Any gardener in this country can learn the whole method in a single afternoon and start the same day. The only thing it requires is getting to the vine early enough before it has already decided where it is going. That is the one rule. Start early. And if you are watching this in June and your vine is already running, do not turn it off. We are going to talk about that too. Because it is not too late. It is almost never too late with the squash vine, as long as the vine is still growing. And in June, your squash vine is absolutely still growing. Come on, let me show you how the old folks did this. It helps to understand what a squash vine actually wants before you try to tell it what to do. A squash vine is not a bush. It is not a compact plant that sits in one place and minds its own business. It is a climber. The whole structure of the plant is built for reaching, grabbing, and pulling itself forward. Look closely at any squash vine that has been growing for 3 weeks, and you will see the tendrils. Small, thin, coiled little fingers that reach out from the stem in every direction, feeling for something solid to grab onto. When a tendril finds something, it can wrap around a fence wire, a stick, a piece of twine, the stem of a neighboring plant. It coils tight within hours. That grip is surprisingly strong. The vine anchors itself and keeps going. The plant does not care whether it grabs onto something vertical or something horizontal. It will take what it can find. If the only thing available is the ground and the open air of your garden path, it goes along the ground. If there is a fence in front of it, it goes up the fence. If there is a tomato cage nearby, it goes through the tomato cage and takes the tomato with it. The tendril does not have preferences. It has reach. Your job is to put the right structure in front of that reach before the vine finds something you do not want it to find. This is the whole principle of vertical training. You are not fighting the plant. You are not bending it somewhere it does not want to go. You are giving it what it is already looking for and pointing that thing straight up instead of sideways. Once the tendrils find your vertical structure and grip it, the vine follows the structure. It goes up because that is where the grip is.
Vertical training is like giving your squash a roadmap. It's a game changer.
And once it is going up, it stays going up. The plant's own nature does the work for you. Now, before you put any structure in the ground, you need to know which kind of squash you are growing. Because the support that works for a delicata is not the same support that works for a butternut, and a spaghetti squash will pull down a structure that would hold a zucchini just fine. There are 2 things that determine what support you need: the weight of the mature fruit and the length the vine wants to run. Summer squash, your zucchini, your yellow crookneck, your pattypan, these are the lightest and most forgiving. The vines are thick and strong, but not especially long, usually topping out at 4 to 6 feet. The fruit is harvested small and young before it puts on serious weight. A simple trellis of cattle panel, a wooden frame with jute twine strung horizontally every 8 inches, or even a sturdy section of wire fencing leaned against a fence post will hold a zucchini vine without any trouble. These are your easiest vertical grows and the best place to start if you have never trained a squash vine before. Winter squash is a different situation. A butternut vine can run 8 to 12 feet. A spaghetti squash vine can run longer. And the fruit at maturity can weigh 3, 4, 5 pounds or more. That weight hanging on a vine that is 6 feet off the ground will pull down a flimsy structure and snap a vine that is not properly supported under the fruit. You need something with real strength. A cattle panel arch is the old standard, and it earns its reputation. Cattle panel is the heavy-gauge welded wire fencing sold at farm supply stores in 16-foot lengths, bent into an arch over a garden bed, and anchored at both ends with T-posts or wooden stakes driven deep. It holds more weight than any squash vine will ever put on it, and it lasts for years. Esther's family has been using the same 2 cattle panel arches for over a decade. You pull them out in fall, store them flat, put them back in spring. They do not rust, they do not bend, they do not fail. If a cattle panel arch is more than you want to build this season, a simpler option for winter squash is a sturdy A-frame made from 2 sections of heavy wire fencing leaned together and tied at the top. Not as elegant, but solid enough to hold a butternut if you anchor the feet well. What you want to avoid with heavy fruited squash is any structure that flexes. Bamboo poles tied with twine, lightweight garden netting hung from a single rope, flimsy tomato cages repurposed as trellises. These will start the season fine and fail you in August when the fruit is putting on weight and a summer thunderstorm puts pressure on the whole structure at once. For any winter squash you train vertically, you will also need to support the individual fruit as it grows. This is the part that stops most people when they first hear about vertical squash. The fruit just hangs there in the air. It does, and it is fine, but only if you give it a little help. The old method is a sling. A piece of old cotton t-shirt, a section of pantyhose, a square of burlap loosely tied, anything with some give to it that can cradle the bottom of the fruit and tie off to the trellis above. The sling takes the weight off the stem and distributes it to the structure. Without the sling, a heavy butternut hanging from its stem will eventually pull that stem loose from the vine. With the sling, the fruit hangs safely until it is ready to harvest. Esther cuts the slings from old shirts that have worn past mending. Nothing is wasted. One more thing before we talk about the training itself. The direction your trellis faces matters more than most gardeners realize. A vertical trellis running north to south casts its shade east and west as the sun moves. A trellis running east to west casts its shade to the north. If you run your squash trellis along the north edge of your garden with the vine climbing, the south-facing side, the vine gets full sun all day, and the trellis casts its shade behind it to the north, where it shades nothing you are trying to grow. This is the placement the old kitchen gardeners used, and it is still the right one. South-facing climb, shade falling away from the garden. Get the placement wrong, and your vertical squash becomes a shade problem instead of a space solution. Put your structure in the right place, match the strength of the structure to the weight of the fruit, and have your slings ready before the squash sets fruit. Do those three things, and the support system will never be what fails you. Now, let us talk about the vine itself. The vine is going to tell you when it is ready.
Patience is key. Let the plant show you the way.
You do not go out to the garden looking for something to do to your squash plant. You go out and you look at the plant, and the plant shows you what the next step is. That is the rhythm of the whole method. Once you have it in your hands for one season, you will never lose it. Here is when you start. The seedling goes in the ground, and for the first 2 weeks you leave it completely alone. It is putting its energy into roots, not into vines, and there is nothing to train yet. The stem is short and the leaves are small. The whole plant is busy underground where you cannot see it. Leave it alone. Water it, keep the weeds back, and leave it alone. Around week 3, sometimes week 4, depending on your weather and your soil, the main vine begins to run. You will see it. The stem starts to extend beyond the leaf canopy, reaching out along the ground with those first tendrils uncurling at the tip. This is your moment. Not tomorrow, not next week. This week, while the vine is still short and flexible and has not yet committed to a direction. Pick the vine up gently, the whole growing tip in your open hand, not gripping it, just cradling it. Point it toward your trellis. Lay the stem against the lowest wire or the first horizontal strand of twine. Use a soft tie to hold it there loosely. Garden tape, a torn strip of cotton, a piece of old pantyhose, anything that will hold without cutting into the stem. Tie it like you are tying a bow on a gift, not like you are securing a fence post. The stem needs room to thicken as it grows. A tie that is right today can strangle the vine in 2 weeks if it has no give. That first tie is the most important thing you will do all season. You are showing the vine where to go before it has gone anywhere else. The tendril at the tip will find the wire within a day or 2 and wrap around it on its own. Once that happens, the vine has made up its mind. It is going up. From that point forward, your job gets much easier because the plant is doing most of the work itself. Check the vine every 3 to 4 days after that first tie, not every day, every 3 to 4 days. Each time you check, the growing tip will have moved 6 inches to a foot further up the trellis. Guide it gently to the next wire or the next strand of twine. Add a loose tie if the tendril has not already grabbed on by itself. Most of the time, the tendril will have already found the structure. You will just be confirming what the vine has already decided. On a healthy squash vine in warm summer weather, you are adding 1 tie every week, sometimes less. That is the whole labor of the method. 1 soft tie once a week, 5 minutes in the garden in the early morning before the day gets hot. Now, the side shoots. This is where people get confused and where getting it wrong costs you either your harvest or your structure. A squash vine puts out side shoots from the main stem the same way a tomato puts out suckers. Little secondary vines that sprout from the joint where a leaf meets the main stem. They reach out looking for somewhere to go. If you leave every side shoot on a vertical vine, you end up with a heavy tangled mass that pulls on the structure. It blocks air from moving through the plant. It invites the mildew that will end your season early, but you do not remove all the side shoots either. The side shoots are where most of your female flowers appear. The female flowers are where your fruit comes from. Remove every side shoot and you remove most of your harvest. What you are looking for is balance. On a summer squash vine, allow the first 2 or 3 side shoots to develop to about a foot long. Then pinch the growing tip of each side shoot off. Let that foot of side vine set its flowers and its fruit and stop there. It will not keep running because you have removed its growing tip. 2 or 3 managed side shoots per plant, each stopped at a foot, gives you plenty of fruit without overwhelming the structure. On a winter squash vine, the approach is more conservative because the fruit is heavier and each fruit takes longer to mature. Allow 1, at most, 2 side shoots to develop on a vertical winter squash. Pinch everything else when it is still small and soft before it has put any real energy into growing. 1 main vine running straight up the trellis with 1 side shoot allowed to develop on each plant gives you focused energy going into a manageable number of large fruits that will have time to fully ripen before your first frost. The pinching itself is simple. Use your thumbnail and your index finger for any shoot smaller than a pencil. For anything larger, use a clean pair of small scissors or a garden knife wiped with rubbing alcohol between plants. The rubbing alcohol matters. Squash plants share diseases through cuts the same way tomato plants do, and a dirty blade moved from one plant to the next spreads trouble through your whole row in one morning. Clean the blade, make the cut, move on. Now, the leaves. As the vine climbs higher, the leaves at the very bottom of the plant, the oldest leaves closest to the soil, begin to yellow and fade. This is natural. The plant is pulling energy out of its oldest leaves and sending it upward to the new growth. When a leaf has gone more than halfway yellow, it is no longer contributing anything to the plant. Remove it with a clean cut close to the main stem. This keeps the base of the plant open to air, keeps the soil from staying too wet under dense leaf cover, and removes the entry points for soil-borne disease that splashes up from the ground during watering and rain. Do not remove green leaves unless they are diseased. A green leaf is still working. Let it work. The disease to watch for on a vertical squash is powdery mildew, the white chalky coating that appears on the upper surface of the leaves, usually in late summer when the nights start to cool and the mornings turn damp. A vertical vine gets better airflow than a vine sprawling on the ground, and that airflow delays the mildew significantly, but it will still come eventually in most American gardens. When you see the first white patches, remove those leaves entirely and dispose of them away from the garden, not in the compost pile. Do not let mildewed leaves sit on the soil. The spores spread fast. Caught early and managed by removing affected leaves, powdery mildew will slow your plant down, but it will not end your season. Let it go unchecked for 2 weeks and it will take the whole plant. Water at the base of the plant, never on the leaves. With a vertical vine, this is easier than with a sprawling one because the base of the plant is right there in front of you, not buried under 6 feet of spreading canopy. A soaker hose laid along the base of your trellis row is the cleanest solution. The leaves stay dry, the roots get steady moisture, and the mildew loses one of its favorite conditions for spreading. Esther has run a soaker hose along every squash row for as long as I can remember, and the difference in disease pressure compared to overhead watering is not small. It is significant. Feed the vine once every 2 weeks with a balanced fertilizer once fruit has set. Before fruit sets, the plant needs nitrogen to build its leaves and stem. After fruit sets, it needs phosphorus and potassium to fill the fruit. A balanced vegetable fertilizer applied at the base of the plant covers both. Do not overfeed nitrogen after the fruit has set, or you will get beautiful large leaves and small pale fruit, which is the opposite of what you are after. That is the whole week-by-week practice. One tie added as the vine climbs. Side shoots pinched to a foot on summer squash, removed almost entirely on winter squash. Old yellow leaves taken off clean. Mildewed leaves removed and disposed of away from the garden. Water at the base, never on the leaves. Feed every 2 weeks after fruit sets. 5 to 10 minutes in the garden 3 times a week.
Less work, more reward. That's the beauty of vertical training.
That is what vertical squash training asks of you from planting to harvest. Less work than untangling a vine from your tomato row on a hot July afternoon. Considerably less. Now, I want you to step back for a moment and look at what you actually get when you do this right. Not just the vine going up the trellis instead of across the ground. The whole picture of what changes in your garden when one plant stops eating 12 feet of your best growing space and starts using 2. Take a standard backyard garden bed, 10 feet long and 4 feet wide. One squash plant trained horizontally the way most American gardeners grow, it fills that entire bed by itself and spills over the edges besides. Nothing else grows there. The squash owns it from June until frost. You plan to grow beans along that fence. You plan to put lettuce in the corner. You plan to tuck some herbs along the south edge where the sun hits in the afternoon. None of that happened because the squash got there first and the squash won. Now, put that same plant on a trellis at the north end of that same bed. The vine goes straight up 4, 5, 6 feet. The footprint of the plant on the ground is 18 inches wide. The other 8.5 feet of that bed are yours. Plant lettuce under the trellis on the north side where the vine casts its afternoon shade. Lettuce bolts in full summer sun, and here you have built it a shade canopy for free. Plant a short row of bush beans in the middle of the bed where the sun still reaches. Tuck a few radishes along the south edge where they will be harvested long before the squash fruit is ready to pick. 1 bed, 1 trellis, 4 crops. That is what vertical training actually means in practice. It is not a trellis trick. It is a way of multiplying what a fixed piece of ground can feed your family. Esther figured the numbers one summer when we were talking about how much a family actually saves by using space well. A standard American backyard garden runs somewhere between 200 and 400 square feet for a family that is serious about growing food but not farming. At the low end of that range, 200 square feet, if 3 or 4 squash plants are sprawling horizontally the way most people grow them, those plants alone account for 1/3 to half the total garden space from midsummer on. Everything else gets squeezed into whatever is left. Train those same plants vertically and you get the squash and you get your garden back at the same time. The fruit itself grows better vertical than it does on the ground. This surprises people when they first hear it, and then it makes complete sense once they think it through. A squash sitting on the soil is in contact with moisture, and with whatever lives in that moisture. Fungal disease, rot, the slow softening that comes from one side of the fruit, never seeing sun or air. A squash hanging free on a vertical vine gets air on all sides. The skin stays dry. The fruit colors evenly because the sun reaches it from more angles as the day moves. A butternut grown vertical comes off the vine with a harder, drier skin that cures better and stores longer than one grown on the ground. Esther has kept vertical grown butternuts in the root cellar through February. Ground-grown ones from the same planting rarely lasted past December in the same conditions. The harvest is easier too. On a sprawling vine, you are crouching and crawling and pushing leaves aside looking for fruit that is hiding underneath the canopy in the dark and the damp. You miss some every time. They get too big, too seedy, past their best eating before you find them. On a vertical vine, the fruit hangs in front of you at eye level or just below. You walk the row and you see everything. Nothing hides. You pick summer squash at exactly the right size before it has gone woody and oversized, because you can see it the moment it is ready. You never again find a zucchini the size of a baseball bat hiding under a leaf, because on a vertical vine there is nowhere for it to hide. Here is what I want you to know about why this method stopped being passed down in most American gardens. It takes a little more attention in the first 3 weeks than just putting a seedling in the ground and walking away. You have to put up a structure before you plant. You have to make that first tie at the right moment. You have to check the vine every few days while it is getting established. The seed companies and the garden centers do not sell you this method because there is nothing to sell. The structure you build from cattle panel or wooden stakes and twine lasts for years. You buy it once. The ties you make from old shirts cost nothing. The knowledge, once you have it, is yours for the rest of your gardening life and your children's gardening leaves after that. There is no product in it for anyone selling you seeds and starts and garden supplies. So the packets say, plant in hills, give each plant plenty of room, and a whole country grows squash horizontally and wonders every June where the garden went. You do not have to wonder anymore. So here is what I want you to do this week. Walk out to your garden or your planned garden space and find where the sun hits longest and strongest along the north edge of your best bed. That is where your trellis goes. If you are at a farm supply store this week, look at the cattle panel section and put your hand on one. Feel the weight of it. That is what holds a butternut all August without flinching. If you are earlier in the season and your squash is not yet in the ground, put the structure up before you plant. If your vine is already running and you are watching this in June or July, go out today and find the growing tip. Pick it up gently. Point it at the nearest solid structure you have. Make the first tie today. It is not too late. Next time, since we've been talking about how to get more from a small garden space, I am going to show you the old way our family interplants the 3 sisters, corn, beans, and squash, together in a single bed. The planting sequence, the spacing, the way each plant feeds the next, and the small habits that turn 3 crops into one system that practically tends itself from July through September. It is the natural next step after what we covered today. Until then, put up the structure. Make the first tie, point the vine upward, and remember that a squash plant left alone will take everything it can reach. A squash plant with someone paying attention will give you everything it has, and leave room in the garden for everything else besides. That is how the old folks did it. And once you have done it this way, one season, you will never go back to crawling through the ground cover looking for the zucchini you missed last week. Not once. Tell me in the comments which kind of squash you are growing this year, and whether you have tried training it vertical before. And if your mother or your grandmother had her own way of keeping the squash from eating the whole garden, share it. Those small family solutions are exactly the kind of thing that gets lost when nobody writes it down. I read every single one.